term Yellowbelly, as it's defined by Merriam-Webster, is something or someone that lacks courage or fortitude. But that is not the case for that big old steam locomotive behind me. Chesapeake, Ohio 490 is no stranger to courage nor fortitude. And we're going to get into that today on this episode of History on the Move. Hi, this is Trevor. I hope you grab your favorite cup of coffee, tea, whatever your beverage of choice is. Sit back, relax. I think you'll enjoy this one. So 490 here was not always a Yellowbelly, nor was it a Hudson. What's a Hudson? Well, that is, according to the White classification system for steam locomotives, that is a steam locomotive that has 4 leading wheels, 6 driving wheels, and 4 trailing wheels. So 490 actually started out as a 462 Pacific. And so the story goes, it's 1926, and the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway is looking around their fleet of Pacifics, and they say, well, and we've got these older, F-17 and F-18 class steam locomotives, but we'd really like to add 5 more, and we really want the latest and greatest here. So they call up, maybe not call up, they write American Locomotive Company, ALCO, in this case the Richmond Works of Richmond, Virginia, and they say, look, we would like some of the state-of-the-art, your latest and greatest 462 Pacifics, and we'd like them with things like a duplex automatic stoker. We would like Baker valve gear, 74-inch drivers, a Lesco feed water heater, dual cross-compound air pumps that hang off the front. They call them flying pumps, if you're a C&O guy. And so, in addition to, I should say, a Vanderbilt tender. Vanderbilt tenders were coming of age, and they were actually a creation of Cornelius Vanderbilt III, and that was his claim to fame in the railroad world. So anyway, so these beautiful Pacifics come out from ALCO for the C&O, and 490 is the first of its class, 491, 2, 3, and 4 are its brethren. So again, they have a massive Vanderbilt tender that holds 12,000 gallons and 15 tons of coal. But that's not always the case here, and as we move into 4 years later, 1930, that Vanderbilt tender that it came with would be swapped out for another one that held 16,000 gallons of water and 20 tons of coal. Big monster, big thing. And again, as progress moves forward here, in 1938, the C&O would finally put on there the rectangular tenders that we all know and love about steam locomotives. And that one held 18,000 gallons of water and 28 tons of coal. And that was mostly so that way that tender would limit the amount of water stops it had to make. The bigger the tender, the more water you had to hold, the less water stops you have to make. So, 490 is now the belle of the ball, if you will. It's going around, it's doing its thing, and what I find fascinating is it actually went in 1933 to the Chicago World's Fair. I think that's pretty neat. There's a really good photo. It's kind of ominous, actually, because in the background, it says General Motors. It's almost like this ominous, painting a picture of things to come, called the Diesels. But nonetheless, it went there and strutted its stuff in the pageant. And, so 490 as a Pacific was hauling things like the Sportsman. The Sportsman ran from Newport News, Virginia to Washington to D.C., and then on to Detroit, Michigan, its terminus. And later, it would then go on to pull the George Washington train, the most famous C&O train that I know of, and so most people know of. That route was between Newport News, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and the almighty Chicago, Illinois. So, as these locomotives are doing their thing, they are kind of high on the roster. But eventually, 1946 rolls around, it turns into, hey, this idea is coming about, and we'd like another locomotive. how does 490 behind me go from a 462 Pacific to a 464 Hudson? More importantly, where, when, how? We're going to answer all these questions for you. So, the year is 1942. There's a gentleman by the name of Robert R. Young. And Robert R. Young is call him a businessman. He's a mogul in that sense. And he gets control of something called the Allegheny Corporation. He becomes the chairman. And in turn, the Allegheny Corporation has a controlling part of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. So this happens in 1942 during World War II. And Robert R. Young is definitely very railroad friendly. He's very much a progressive as it comes to passenger train service and even freight trains. And what he really wanted was to push the Chesapeake and Ohio into a realm to where they were, if you will, the gold standard for passenger service. And so 1946 rolls around, it's post-war, and you know, despite how we portray the post-World War II, it's not all happy and, you know, happy as larks and ooh, everything's great. It's not. There are some coal strikes going on. There's booms and busts and everything else that happens after a major war like World War II. And so Robert R. Young is now the chairman of the board for the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, and he pitches this idea to the board to say, look, I really want to do something. I want to improve passenger service in this post-war year, because he knew the competition of the airlines, the budding airlines. He knew that the motorways and, you know, not the freeways yet, because we're not to Eisenhower, but he knew that the roads and the automobile were really competing against him in terms of passenger service. So he said, I'm going to do this one better. I'm going to make passenger service, at least on the C&O, the gold standard. So he comes up with this two trains. One is called the Chessie. The other one is just called Train X, with a hyphen in there, Train-X. And so his idea is to create a second-to-none, streamlined, beautiful service that could not be replicated anywhere else. And so the idea behind well, let me back up here. The idea behind the Chessie was to have a perfect route that went from Washington, D.C. to Cincinnati. And it had branches that fed it, if you will, from Louisville and Newport News, Virginia, etc. And so his idea, though, was that he would create this train at this time frame, 1946 or so, with the idea that I'm going to compete against the Baltimore and Ohio's the Cincinnatian, and I'm going to compete against the Norfolk and Western's Powhatan Arrow, pulled by the famous, everybody's favorite Norfolk and Western J classes. And so, and both of those, the Cincinnatian and the Powhatan Arrow, were pulled by streamlined steam locomotives. And so Robert R. Young says to the board, I'm going to do this. And so to do it in a more economical fashion, instead of going to a builder, Alco, Baldwin, Lima, whomever, they say, look, we want a brand new order, because that costs money. And, you know, money is kind of, there are a lot of coal strikes going on at this time. So money is, you know, especially with the C&O being a coal hauling railroad, it's kind of one of their main sources of income. So what they do is they take some of the four of the 462 Pacifics, let me say that one right, 462 Pacifics, the F-19s, and they shop them in Huntington, West Virginia. And so as they emerge, as they come out, most of them went in mid-1946. 490 behind me went in May or June of 1946 and emerged in January of 1947, looking like what you see behind me now. So as these trains come out, as these locomotives, come out, they are now streamlined. They are now looked at as competitors with the J classes and the Cincinnatians streamlined P7s, you know, for the B&O. But the sad reality, if you will, of the Chessie was that it never really got off the ground. The goal was to have the main thoroughfare from DC to Cincinnati pulled by the M1 steam turbines. And the feeder lines, if you will, Newport News and Louisville, were going to be pulled by these guys behind me, the L1s, Hudsons. But sadly, it never really got off the ground. It got into the test phase. Robert R. Young was, I don't think he really understood at that time one, they were very short of cash, but he didn't really understand that they were in a kind of downtrodden era, and that being progressive at this time was not beneficial to the board, to the shareholders, as everybody loves, and all these other people. So in this case, so let me say, the order for the Chessie did come through. Bud, the Bud company, did build the cars, the Streamline cars, the stainless steel fluting on the sides, and these were shopped again in Huntington, West Virginia, and we'll get into all the modifications, we'll call them, that they did. And the fascinating part, though, is yeah, the steam turbines were built too, but they were very shortly scrapped, mostly because they were the technology was just not there yet to make it economical, and diesels were very prevalent at that time. So Train X, as I mentioned before, though, we'll segue to that for just a few seconds here. Train X really never even got off the ground, although there is a photo of it at the 1948-49 World's Fair, but it is literally just a mock-up of a car. It's not a full-fledged car. So I think that's kind of fascinating, and that is the genesis, if you will, of how we got 490 and the other three of her brethren that were streamlined. And we're going to get you a really up-close and personal look with 490 and show you what it is that makes it very unique, and we're very thankful that we have it here at the B&O Railroad Museum. And we're really going to, we're not going to get too in-depth. We're going to talk about the poppet valves. I know everybody likes to understand or, you know, have an idea of how those work. And now we're going to take it apart and show you, but we'll do the best we can. So stay tuned. So I'm on the ground here, and I got the old girl behind me. Let's go through and have a good walkthrough for 490, and we'll get you an idea of what exactly makes it so unique. So let's start off with, this thing had roller bearings on all of the axles, including, let's go back and have a look, including the six-wheel, each of these trailing, the trucks, sorry, on the tender. So, and Timken, you know, this is just kind of par for the course for that time frame. Them at SKF, although I'm not sure if the bearings, I thought I read these might be SKF on the crank, but I'm not 100% sure. So, but yeah, so there's roller bearings, and these were updated. So these are the 74-inch drivers right here that you see. And let's see if we can get a better look here. I guess we can. All right, so what you can see is actually a pretty good shot. Here's the bottom of the boiler. This is a one-piece cast steel frame. This whole thing was cast, and then in the center of it was the air tank, the air reservoir, and that's right here for the air brake system. There's your tank. So yeah, so these were like I said, these were updated a little bit. Still 74-inch, which is what the Pacifics had. 490 is what the Pacific would have had that, and we'll get into what we call the heart of the beast, which is the poppet valves. You can see some of that stuff above me here and over here, but we'll get into that in a minute. So what I always find fascinating is that for a guy like me who used to work on airplanes in the Navy, they safety wired these, and this brings joy to my heart. So these are castle nuts, and as you torque them down to whatever spec, there is a hole that's drilled through the threaded portion here, and you line up these, you have to line up the, we'll call them fluted sections here, and that lines up with that hole, and then you would put the safety wire through and then tighten it at whatever point. That's just a really good looking safety wire job. All right, so let's keep moving here. Again, there's the poppet valves. We'll get into that in a minute. So yeah, roller bearings on the leading wheels as well, on the leading truck here, both axles. And here's underneath, and it's kind of cool here. So the compressors, I think we talked about this for the 462 model of this. The compressors were slung, they were called the flying pumps by C&O, and these were on the front of the 462s, and they moved them here, obviously, to get them out of the way and make them a little bit easier for the streamlining, and so you could fit the stairs in there too. There's the stairs to the running boards. So let's keep moving here. So this is kind of neat. I want to point this out on the front here. In terms of the coupler, this had a, obviously for the streamlining, it had the hideaway coupler here. So there's a big release mechanism here. I hope we can make that work. Nope. That's a two-person job. But so you press down on this, and this whole door opens up, and the coupler then swings out. And as the coupler swings out, you would hook your chain here, and that is your that is for the cut lever. And the cut lever is over here. So this is how you pull on this, and that's what actually cuts or pulls the pin, and then the coupler pulls away. All right, so I've moved over to the other side of 490 here, and here's this is the generator, the turbo generator here, steam powered. Pretty much the standard, the Pyle National Company. So let's keep looking here. There is so much to look at inside of this thing. Holy God, have mercy. So something else I'd like to point out is when it came to the firebox, I was reading that the firebox is pretty much part and parcel on the same grate size and firing size. The inside of it was the same firing size as the New York J1 Hudsons. So the best comparison for the best comparison in terms of steam at that time would have been the 464s that the New York Central had in terms of the J1 Hudsons. And in terms of reading about this stuff ahead of time, like were they equivalent? To an extent, but I'll let you figure that out. There's plenty of good information out there. Karen Parker is one I would reference a lot. She is really good about breaking this stuff down in terms of steam and the comparisons and all that stuff. So check out, I think her website, if I can find it, and if it's still in use, I'll plug it somewhere down below, but it's karenparker.net. I believe she's got piles of really good books out there too that she's written about this stuff. But let's keep moving. All right, so here's your trailing truck. Here's one of the brake cylinders here. And like we said, there's Timken roller bearings on all the wheels, which literally you could probably push this thing by hand, right? That was one of the Timken company's shows of what they could do for these particular locomotives. There's one in particular there's a scheme that was, not scheme, I guess you want to call it that, but maybe not. The 4 Aces, if you remember your railroad history, Timken 4 Aces, the 11111. Is that right? 11111. Quadruple 1. And it's sitting in a station, and they have like 3 or 4 of these women, you know, pulling it with a rope over their shoulder like this. And the thing was, you could literally just give it a little, and it would move. So it's kind of neat. Let's go up on the running boards and see what we can see up there. All right, so before we get into what we see up top here, something I want to point out is the C&O for Progress logo. If anybody's seen that before, that is definitely during the Robert R. Young era. C&O for Progress was literally like his baby. That's where that came from. All right, so let's keep moving here. There's her number boards up top. Yes, she has a stack cap on there. And a lot of this stuff has been, this is inside of the streamlining itself. This is actually a good view. You can kind of see how the streamlines flow. Now, some of this has rotted over the years, so we have to be fair about that. That is what it is. But this gives you a really good idea of how the streamlining was put into place. So you could see the little, so they welded onto the boiler here a plate that came out, or not a plate, this is cast, and this is almost like it's a seat for all of this plate to sit on. The streamlining sat on top of that. So let's keep moving here. There's some sand domes there. So you have four places to put sand in here. Let's have a look, see. Oh, ho, ho, ho. We still got some sand in here. I don't know if this is vintage C&O sand, but it's still sand nonetheless. So that would go down to the drivers. So again, you have 4 of those here. Let's keep on moving. And we'll talk about the throttle mechanism. So here's a good, actually let's go back up here. Here's her 3 safety valves up top. And there's not really, honestly, there's really not that much else to kind of look at up here. It's pretty bare. But let's talk about her front end throttle. So most of the steam, let me back this up here a minute. Most of the steam locomotives that were super powered had front end throttles. And the advantage to a front end throttle is that it allows a faster response time and there's less lag as you yank the throttle back out. And how that works is there's still a power reverse. It's an Alco power reverse on this thing. It's in the cab, and we'll look at that in a minute. But through a series of linkages, this is kind of cool how this works. So here's one set of linkage that comes down. Obviously it has space up here so it can move. And that comes down. And then here is its pivot point. So it pivots, because running all the way down would actually be ridiculous. But so it's a pivot point. And then it keeps on going through one of the blocks here. And then here is where it goes into. This is where the throttle actually is behind here. And this is what, again, you open that up and emit steam down into those poppet valves. So let's get on the ground and keep, actually, you know what, why don't we get in the cab? Let's have a look-see there. Okay, so before we get into the cab, let's point out some fun facts while we're on the ground here and looking at 490. So when it went in 1946, summertime we'll say, 1946, and it went into Huntington's shops in West Virginia, they already knew then, and they were at peace with the fact that they didn't have the technology in Huntington at that time to do the stainless steel fluting and this shapely nose behind me. So what they do? They contracted it out. And there's a company in Davenport, Iowa, well, either is or was, I don't know if they're still in business, called Bettendorf Works. And they did all of this fluting in the yellow. So anything in the yellow, which actually, cool fact, it was actually originally orange when it came out. And that was to match the heritage, if you will, of the C&O passenger cars at that time. So back in the turn of the century, 1890s, 1900, 1910s, the passenger cars were this beautiful orange color. So that's originally what 490's Yellowbelly was. She was an orange belly to begin with. And eventually, sometime in the, oh God, I'm drawing a blank on this. But if you remember, drop it down in the comments. She was painted, this was painted into the yellow. And so, but anyway, so Bettendorf Works is who did this streamlining job here. and then the C&O contracted out to Bud Company in order to do the fluting that you see running up and down here, and that's so it would match with the Chessie systems, the Chessie trains consist, because all of those cars came from Bud Company, and they were going to be mirror images of most of the Streamliners out there, you know, fluted sides and stainless steel, etc., etc. So, but let's get in the cab and let's have a look-see there. Okay, so I've ascended the ladder there. Okay, so in the cab here you have very basic an engineer's seat. This would have been probably for, you know, like a road foreman or somebody that is just along for the ride. Seat-wise, let's talk about seats. You get your fireman's seat, which is not much of a seat, definitely needs to be reconditioned. And this would have been the head and brakeman seat right here. And if we go sit in the engineer's seat, you really get a good idea of what this thing looks like. You get a pretty good view. Now, granted, I would not want to look at this little window in front of me, because you have a very, very tiny view, and granted, it's not much to look at, so you were basically doing this number the whole time. So, we talked about Alco Power Reverse. We're on the ground. That's what that is right there. That's the Alco Power Reverse. Here's your throttle, your notches. Got a independent brake, and you got the train brake. So this controls the locomotive. This controls the train consist. As to the rest of this piping, well, I can tell you one of these is going to be the bell. I'm going to assume it's probably this guy. And one of these is going to be the sanders, and I'm going to assume it's going to be one of these, one of these. Well, again, one of these is for the sanders, and one of these is for the bell. So I want to do a little correction here in real time, because I don't want to give you fake news. So we're talking about the controls here. So that, yes, that is your power reverse, independent brake, train brake, throttle. But this is your sander. That is your sander. And that is your bell. But I want to give you that update just to make sure that we are all on the same page and that I'm not spreading a whole bunch of baloney. All of your electrical lines are here. Again, Pyle, National Company, is the preeminent people in that domain. Let's get into there's a automatic stoker here. And the best view, but you can see in the firebox. And again, this was akin to the J1 Hudson's firebox. Same dimensions and firing area and all that good stuff. So there's your fire doors. Here's your grate shakers. So on this side, you got two on this side. And if you're the fireman, you're going to sit here. Here's all of your controls for the automatic stoker. Your stoker motor, etc., etc. Here's all of your controls for the main turret. These are actually still labeled. So you got a dynamo, water, temp, heater. I can't read that from the ground. That's to turn on the steam just to the turret itself. I cannot read that one either. Oh, what do we got? Steam heat. So this would have been to turn on steam heat to the consist behind you. And unfortunately, her boiler tag is painted over, which makes me sad. But this would have ran 200, 205, 210, somewhere in there, pounds of pressure. And more than likely, this also dictates, this line right here dictates the top of the crown sheet. So I think that's pretty neat. Really though, it's fascinating to see this stuff, especially as a history lover and a history major, I think this stuff is fascinating to look at. This is cool too. I will point this out. It still has, well, remnants of the curtains that you could draw over. That's pretty neat. We'll get you a shot of the tender here. So again, why don't we go inside? Okay, I'm inside 490's tender. So if you ever wanted to feel like, hey, I wonder what 28 tons of coal would look like and feel like, well, it would look like this. So all these would be pulled up, and the stoker screw is right below here, and obviously we follow that, goes underneath the cab floor, and bada boom, right into the firebox. So again, capacity here, 28 tons of coal and 18,000 gallons of water in this thing. Again, and that tender was also one that they swapped out from, or not swapped out, but it was brand new in the mid-30s is when they put the rectangular tenders on here, and that's when the capacity increased from the old Vanderbilt tenders to what you see now, 18,000 gallons of water, 28 tons of coal. Let's keep moving. So before I forget, this in the cab is the injector control. So this is the engineer side, and the engineer has control of the injector. This is it here, and this is what emits steam to the injector to then push the water into the boiler. So 490 has a Nathan non-lifting injector. And what's a non-lifting injector? Well, simply put, you have water in the tender, and in this case, the non-lifting injector sits below the water line of that, and gravity does the work. So gravity, so you have water in the tender in this mass, and then it comes down through a hose and sits basically at the back of the injector until the engineer then opens this guy up. Steam is emitted through a series of venturis, and it's a bit of black magic, if you will. Not really. But then put that steam through the venturis pushes that water at super high velocity to then overcome the check valve. Check valves will only work one way, so you can only get whatever it is, in this case water, into the boiler, cannot come back out. And so it works at super high velocity in order to overcome that check valve to then get into the boiler and stay in the boiler. And so in this case, like I said, 490 has a single Nathan that sits right below the engineer's portion of the cab here, and I think it's kind of neat, and I'll flash a quick little panning of it underneath. But yeah, so that is something I wanted to point out before I forgot. And something else, if you ever go to Western Maryland Scenic Railroad and you ride in the cab of 1309, you'll see them over here. The engineer has one, and in 1309's case, the fireman has one, and that's from the whole, that's probably some leftover remnants from, in this day and age, since the Gettysburg event, we'll call it, the Gettysburg Railroad steam debacle, every locomotive has to have two fail-safe ways of getting water into the boiler. So, but yeah, if you ride 1309, you will see them operating the injector, whether it's the fireman or the engineer. So it's kind of neat, fun to point out. Let's keep moving. I want to point this out before I forget. Just behind the trailing truck, or in conjunction with the trailing truck, here's the feed line to it. But these had Franklin boosters on the trailing truck here. And those could be engaged, as I read, up to 35 miles per hour. So a lot of superpower steam locomotives had that, and that's just kind of part and parcel. You know, when you really need to get up and go from a stop, this is the guy to do it. So here's a view you don't get to see every day. This is inside the nose of 490. So let's point out some things here. We got your dual cross compound air pumps. And I'm sure the question is always asked, well, why is there, what's the purpose of the grating here? This grating in the front, and that's to allow air to flow through and flow over this little intercooler. And what this intercooler is used for is, as you compress air, what happens? Air gets hot. And air doesn't do as much work hot as it does cool. So when the pumps cycle, and in this case, you have two of these guys, it creates a lot of heat. And to help dissipate that heat, that's what this guy is for. So as you're moving along, this helps to dissipate the heat from those dual cross compound air pumps. And this is about, this and the rear view, ass end of this thing is about the best view we're going to get. And if you want to try to picture in your mind what 490 would have looked like as a Pacific, this is it. There's your smoke box door, which is kind of neat. And this actually inside of here, let's get inside, you can have a look. Get you a really good idea of how this was made. So you can see the seams. There's seams all along here inside of 490's nose. And this is how, these are welded. So this is what the Bettendorf works, as I was telling you, would have done. This is their work. And you can see how it just goes alongside, and they made this little bracket. Oops. And it bolts to that. So I think that's pretty fascinating. But yeah, this was streamlining at its peak and pinnacle, which I'm really glad I got to get you guys in here and allow some of you guys to see some of this work. So yeah, it's just welded, nothing crazy, nothing ridiculous, but it's done on the inside, obviously, so you don't see it. And that's what makes 490, at this point, 490. Okay, so before we understand how poppet valves work and why railroads such as the Pennsylvania Railroad and in this case, the C&O wanted to use them, we should understand why they pushed for that, and more importantly, what is a piston valve, because that was the competitor, if you will. That was what the C&O and Pennsylvania Railroad were trying to get beyond, was the piston valve. So I'm actually using 2705. This is another C&O steam locomotive here. It's a 284. And 2705 has piston valves in it, and this is a really good demonstrator. Now we can't take all this apart, so what I've done is and I'll put this up on the screen for you so you can see it. I've got a really good chart and I've colored it in so you can see what does what and helps differentiate here. So let's start with pointing some things out. So this is inside admission. Inside admission means that you have steam that comes from the throttle valve, all right, that's yanking on the throttle, and goes down and inside of, in this case, a piston valve. And so let's describe what we're looking at here. You have the valve chamber, that's up here, and the cylinder, that's down here. And there's passages between the two, on this side and on this side. So you have two passages that come down. And inside of the valve chamber, you have the piston valve. The piston valve looks like a spool with thread wound around it. I should learn to talk. Wound around it. So it looks like a spool. It's symmetrical on both sides. And you have a piston, which lives down here in the cylinder. And that piston is what actually connects to the drive wheels and moves the locomotive. So we need to understand here the other factors at play, what actually makes that piston valve move, or in this case, the term is oscillate, to move back and forth like this. This is oscillating. It's also a good dance move. To oscillate, you need valve gear, and in this case, 2705 has wall shirts, and the C&O also used Baker, but mostly, it was a combination. It was either or. They would use wall shirts or Baker to make that oscillating motion for that piston valve. Now, so steam comes in. Let's go back to that. So inside admission, steam comes in from the throttle valve. If you have, in this case, we have a device called a power reverse. Older locomotives have a Johnson bar, but in this case, you have a power reverse, and that dictates how much steam is going into the cylinder, and more importantly, what direction you want that locomotive to to go. You're either going to go forward, stay still, or you're going to go into reverse. And so the farther forward, or the term is in the corner, right? If you have the power reverse of the Johnson bar in the corner all the way forward, you're admitting as much steam as possible into that piston valve. You're trying to get the most work. So this works for if you're leaving a station and you need as much get up and go in the form of steam as you can get. And so what is going on is that you are now admitting that steam in. That valve moves back to here. That steam comes in, goes through that passage we talked about, and goes into the cylinder. That steam then pushes that piston back, starting that motion. If you have it, now as you're moving along, the term is, right, we said cutoff. Cutoff is pulling it back. It's the amount that you're taking away, if you will. And so as you begin to take it from the forward position and come back to the center, you would use this mostly, the center position, as you're getting up to speed, right? You're getting up to track speed, whatever it's 60, 70, 80, because you want to save as much steam as possible. It's also called the company notch, right? You're saving the company money by not burning as much coal, using as much water, etc., etc. So with the piston valve, you have two problems with that. Well, you have one problem, and you have a good and a bad. We'll say it like that. You have a good and a bad. Good is you are, again, you're not admitting as much steam into that piston valve, subsequently going into the cylinder. So you're not using as much steam. You're being economical, right? That's good. We like economical. But conversely, because a piston valve, what happens on one side happens on the other, right? It is symmetrical in terms of its motion. It does not change in that way. So if it moves, you know, I'm just making up numbers. If it moves 3 inches to admit, it's going to move 3 inches to exhaust. And so because it's same on both sides, you are also getting a kind of a restricted, if you will, exhaust. And therefore, exhaust steam kind of, it does not get all of it out, right, in one push. As the piston comes back, it's not, or sorry, as it's moving forward to exhaust that, it's not exhausting all of it out. You still have some remnants in there. And therefore that, as you get higher into the miles per hour, as you're moving up, you know, 60, 70, this becomes more pronounced and you start to lose, in this case, horsepower and that, you know, that forward momentum. And so that was the big thing for C&O, was trying to, with the poppet valves, was saying, well, can we make these two independent? Because in this case, the piston valve is controlling both the admission and the exhaust of the steam. So the poppet valves essentially make those two operations, admission, exhaust, separate from each other. They are separate. Okay, boy, look at this. I feel like I'm back in high school. Although if you saw my GPA, you'd be like, hey, how'd you get out of high school? I'm here now. So I'll flash these up on the screen. These came from Karen Parker's book about the Hudsons. And again, I'll flash these up on the screen so that way you're not sitting at home going like this with your binoculars, because, you know, that's no fun. And so we'll use these as a reference point. Now, the first one I want to point out is the Pennsylvania Railroad did a comparison between a piston valve K4 locomotive and a poppet valve K4. And what they found was, so the two axes here, you have speed at the bottom, and the vertical, that's your horizontal axis, and your vertical axis is the indicated horsepower in the cylinder. So we'll pick a point and reference here, and we'll say 80 miles an hour. Well, actually, let's go with the peak. The peak would be 60, 65. And what you can see is the piston valve was barely putting out, we'll say 3,500 if I use my finger as a reference coming over to the vertical axis here, 3,500 horsepower. But the poppet valve was putting out just above 4,000 horsepower at that particular speed. So this is what they were testing. Now, what they didn't, you know, and what other steam giants at the time didn't realize was that as this technology progressed, is it's brand new, right? It's kind of like EVs or, you know, other AI and all this other stuff that's going around right now. It's brand new. It's in its infancy. We don't know where it's going to go, but they were going to try it out nonetheless. So that is a crucial chart, one to really kind of take note of, because that's what pushed railroads like the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Chesapeake and Ohio into the, hey, let's try out the Franklin Poppet Valve System. Let's see what the hubbub's all about, if you will. Okay, so in our second chart here, you're going to see a layout, the general arrangement of a Type A poppet valve installation. And you can see all of our major players here, and we're going to point these out in the video after I get you off the tripod there. But you got a valve gearbox, you have your valve chest, you have the cam box in the center, and the awesome thing I like about this is it shows you the cutaway of the locomotive cylinders and how the intake, I guess you call it the admission and the exhaust valves sit, like where they are. And the last one here, or sorry, second to last one here, is a poppet valve. And what is a poppet valve? Well, you could probably say, it's fair to say, and Karen Parker says this in her book, that a poppet valve is akin to the valve on your automobile, in the fact that in your automobile, it admits air and a fuel mixture into, no it doesn't, sorry, let me back up, it admits air, use a fuel injector to admit fuel, but it admits air into the combustion chamber. And what is neat about these is that the poppet valves are very akin to that in the fact that they have a seat, in this case they have two seats, to seal up the passage. But it's actually very hollow inside. It has little baffles and to kind of give it rigidity. But essentially it seals in place, and there's a valve stem itself, and then there's a spring on the other side to help push back. So it's very akin to valves on your automobile. And she has a really good, I think she used Bill Withune as her reference point of this, but she has a really good diagram of how the inlet valve and the exhaust valve and where the exhaust passages are. And again, we use this as a reference as well. And the last one I'm going to point out is this shows you the flow of steam and the position of the valves themselves as it relates to where the power reverse is. So you have admission, that's steam going in, closed, nothing is happening, that's centered almost, and exhaust. So we'll use that as our reference point as we go along. But why don't we get you off the tripod and let's talk about some of the major players here in what makes the Franklin Type A poppet valve gear so unique. Okay, so I've changed shirts because I really don't want to get my other one dirty. It's still kind of a greasy, oily mess inside of there. So let's go in, let's review some of the components first before we start searching for these things. So let me take you in here. All right, so our first thing here is the locomotive cylinders. And we talked about this before. We have the intake valves, the two intake valves are up top. The exhausts are below that on either side. And then the cylinder, the piston, lives inside of here. Now you have your valve gearbox. We talked about this before. There's the main that comes in. So this comes off of the crank and gives you that oscillating motion. And then that, in turn, via gears inside, oscillates these two, intake and exhaust. Sorry, admission. I keep saying intake. Admission and exhaust. Sorry, I come from the gas and diesel world here. And then you have, lastly, your cam box. And this, so here is your, as noted here, it's your side view. So this would be as if you were looking, well, actually this is a good reference point for us because we're going to use the engineer side. So this is the outside, this is the frame rail side, if you will. And there's the little mini, called Walschaerts valve gear, which comes off of the valve gear box. And you got a drifting apparatus up top, and we'll see some of this other stuff as we move along. So let's start with this is what does the oscillating. Now, if you're not really sure what oscillating means, oscillating is back and forth, right? If you've ever done any kind of home improvement work or handyman work, maybe you've used an oscillating tool, Dremel tool, whatever term you want to use. And those use, if you turn it on, one, it'll vibrate the bejeebus out of your hand, but two, they go zzz, like that. That's oscillating back and forth like that. And that is the same motion that this uses. So this, as this slides back and forth, connects here, and then connects here, and this massive guy here, and you can see where it's disconnected, unfortunately, here. Make sure my lighting's pretty good here. You can see where it is disconnected, so the C&O most likely did this. to prevent when it's moved, the valve gear from, scoring the inside of the all the good stuff inside. Anyway, so this would be connected to here, and this is doing this number the whole time, back and forth, just like this. Okay, so you can see it has been disconnected, but let's go around here, and I'm going to try to get you some better lighting. Actually, before we even do that, let's talk about what we're looking at here. So here is the this is the cam box itself, and we talked about this a few seconds ago. Let me make sure my lighting's all right. All right, we're good here. A little too bright for you. That'll do. All right, so behind here are those cams that we talked about. And there's cams, just like in your car, cams rotate, and on those they have lobes, and those lobes are what push on the tappets. The tappets are what push on the valve stem, therefore opening and closing that valve back and forth. So it's a rotary motion with a lobe that's just elongated, pushes on the tappet then pushes in turn on the valve stem opens and closes the valve. So remember, we have admission, which is steam coming in, we have exhaust, steam going out. And so that up top is your admission cam, and here is your exhaust cam, and this is just kind of like a synchronizer, if you will. So while we're here, actually, this is a good time. So this here, it's not the best of lighting. You have to deal with me here. So up top, this is steam coming in. Okay, this big guy here, this is steam coming in. Your intake, so I keep saying intake, admission, steam admission valves are up top here. Your exhaust valves are over here. Okay, so admission, 2 up top, just like on the diagram, and 2 exhaust valves down here. All right, so steam admission of steam here, we have exhaust here. So this exhaust going up to the petticoat and then going up out the stack. So let's move, so that pretty much covers the cylinders themselves. Well, let's go see if we can find this gearbox. Oh, Yahtzee, we win. There it is. So this massive contraption, I'm going to do the best I can here to get you some good lighting. It's kind of hard, and lighting is at a premium. Let's go here. Okay. So remember we talked about the mini wall shirts. That's what this guy here is. And remember, so you have the main crank. Let's see if I can get my hand to go all the way in. Actually, get a better view. That's this here is the main going to that valve gearbox. The valve gearbox sitting right here. There's the bolts, some of the bolts to lock it down. So the main one is right, let's see if I can get you in here, right here. Actually, let's see if I can turn on my other light. Ah, Yahtzee, we win. So here's your mini wall shirts for that, okay? And that is going like this. So this is coming off the revolution of the drivers, right? So as that rotates, it's going, and inside there's gears, and those gears then spin the admission and the exhaust. And those are right here. This is admission, and the exhaust is right here. And so these in turn are also doing that oscillating motion. And I don't know if you can see onto the back. Heck, I can't even see, but they connect to those little mini wall shirts on the back of the cam box. So, and this is underneath the smoke box. So all this is mounted underneath the smoke box here. And so it's really hard to get a good shot of this because it's really tucked in there. But that is your entire poppet valve setup here. Something I want to point out, which I think is rather neat, is I was reading about these in Karen Parker's sort of her write-ups, and she noted that both the cam box and the valve gearbox during its heyday when it was in service were meant to just be R&R'd. And from the world I spent 5 years in the Navy as an aircraft mechanic. R&R is you just remove and replace. So you pull it's a module. You pull the whole thing out, you send it off to a shop. They take it down to the nitty gritty on a bench somewhere, and then they rebuild it, repack it, whatever it, and they send it back to you, and then you put this whole contraption back into the machine. And that's essentially how these were maintained. So, if they call it, the train crew called, hey, we got a problem with the valve gear, Mechanic, steam guy comes out, looks at it, oh, yeah, problems in your valve gear box. Well, the whole valve gear box comes out, gets sent out, and then that gets repacked, rebuilt, yada, 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 and then it comes back to the shops, and those mechanics that are in the roundhouse will put it back in, and 490 is back on its way. So I hope this gave you a really good view. We got to point out some of the key players, if you will, of what make Poppet valve gear operate. And the question you'll probably ask, and most people would ask this, I would ask this too, is, well, if this was so efficient, this was so great, why didn't it last? Well, history-wise, we have to look back at this was coming in at the time. So remember, as 490 goes into service in 1940, or gets rebuilt, comes into service in 1947, World War II is over, and the time has already passed for the EMD-FT, that's 1939, to go out, the demonstrator, to go out and do its thing. And it had already proven to the railroads were already sold on diesel locomotives. So this was kind of going, well, it's kind of here, we're going to try, we hope for the best. And that was about it. The railroads had already sold their soul to the diesel builders, and they had already made the choice. And so that's the main reason, I would argue, why the Poppet valves didn't really catch on, and they were somewhat of a bit of a maintenance debacle. I mean, can you imagine getting that valve gear box out? That doesn't look like very much fun to me. So hope you learned something out of this, and let's get back to the rest of this. So if you've been a fan of this channel for any length of time, or if you're new here, as a history major, it is always good to cite your sources. And I love to give out recommendations for reading to people because, well, I'm a voracious reader and I hope you are too. So this first little batch, actually, I purchased these from the Chesapeake, Ohio, the C&O Historical Society. Their home base is at Clifton Forge. So the first one I want to point out is this guy here. This was the mainstay, the C&O's Homemade Hudsons. This is Karen Parker's excerpts from this other book, Chesapeake, Ohio, Hudson Type Steam Locomotives. Both of these, phenomenal. If you want to know about 490 as the L1, the Hudson, these two, phenomenal, must-reads. If you want to know about 490 as a Pacific, and I learned a good bit about the F-19s, the F-17 class, the F-18s, etc., Chesapeake, Ohio, Heavy Duty Pacific Locomotives by Karen Parker is a really good read. Great detail, lots of the blueprints in there, and all that good stuff. If you want to know about the Chessie train in general, and Robert R. Young, and that, the post-World War II, 40s era kind of mentality of the C&O, check out this guy. Chesapeake, Ohio's the Chessie, the train that was, but never was. And it's actually kind of cool, because that's actually a... That was a phrase coined by Herbert H. Harwood. If you're a fan of this channel, you know George Harwood from our restoration review videos. That's his father, and he's a great writer. But he actually coined that phrase, and he wrote it as he wrote the article for Trains Magazine in July 1969, and he did it under a nom de plume, which would be a fake name of Jeffrey H. George, and those are his two sons' names. So I think it's kind of cool. So check these out wherever you buy books. I'll drop a link to the C&O Historical Society's website in the description box. They are a phenomenal resource, and Thomas W. Dixon and Karen Parker do a great job. I really learned just everything I need to know about 490 just from these. So to kind of keep going here, let me reach out of the picture here for a minute. These are you probably pick these up at rail fairs and, used bookstores, wherever it is that you buy books. But please buy your books. Don't steal them. And if you borrow them, return them. This is kind of a mainstay, the C&O Power. If you can find this anywhere, this has some good write-ups about all the C&O Power, but especially about the Hudsons. And Streamliners was really, really good. Kevin J. Holland. This really talks about the J-Class, Norfolk and Westerns, and the P7s that the Baltimore and Ohio used for the Cincinnatian. Really good read. I got some good info out of this one as well. So that is your reading list if you choose to go out and look for those. But again, I hope you enjoyed all of this information that kind of came together to make up this video. I sure hope you had just as much fun watching this as I had making this. It's not often that we get 490 to go out into the wilderness, if you will, like it is here, where we get to see it in all of its glory and get to really take it in. So I am very fortunate to be able to make this video for you and get you up close and personal, and get the full history of 490 and show you some of the cool features about her. So this is Trevor from History on the Move. Stay tuned. We got some really great videos coming your way. And get out there, look for history, read history, more importantly, make your own history. Take care. I'll see you on the next one.